Good afternoon everyone. I am Dr. G. Atisha, Professor and Head, Department of Electronics and Communication Engineering. I am standing before you to give a presentation on instruction level parallelism and its exploitation. This particular topic is coming under Unit 2 in Computer Architecture and Parallel Processing subject. So this instruction level parallelism talks about exploiting parallelism among different instructions by extending various pipelining techniques. So we all know what is actually pipelining. Pipelining involves three different stages, which is going to be fetching, decoding and the execution of the instructions. Fetching of the instruction actually means the pre-fetching of the instructions from the program memory, and decoding of the instruction means decoding of the pre-fetched instruction into different operations which are to be performed in different clock cycles, and the execution is actually going to be the final stage where the execution of the instruction over the operands is actually going to happen. So this pipelining technique was adapted as a universal technique previously from 2 decades before, and this pipelining brings into effect overlapping among different execution of instructions. So the potential overlap among different instructions is used for the purpose of exploiting the instruction level parallelism among the instructions. So here there are two different main approaches with regards to this instruction level parallelism. The first one being the hardware based dynamic approach, and the second one being the software based approach, static approach over here. In the case of the hardware based dynamic approach, this is being extensively used in servers as well as desktop processors, where the hardware of the underlying processor is involved in bringing the parallelism when the instructions are being executed. And then in the case of static approaches, we finally make use of the software or the compiler in order to exploit the instruction level parallelism among the instructions. So this compiler based static approaches are not as successful as the scientific application when we consider the scientific applications. So in the case of instruction level parallelism, we define a basic quantity which is called as pipeline CPI. CPI basically stands for cycles per instruction, and so this instruction level parallelism is exploited in order to maximize the cycles per instruction. So when exploiting instruction level parallelism, our goal is mainly to maximize the cycles per instruction, where the pipeline cycles per instruction is evolved as a quantity which is equal to the ideal pipeline CPI plus the stalls which arise due to the structural hazards plus the data hazard stalls plus the control stalls. So our aim is to maximize this pipeline CPI. So the parallelism is limited with the basic block. So if we consider the size of a basic block, the basic block size is about 3 to 6 instructions when we consider a standard program. And it is also taken care that the parallelism is optimized across when we try to execute the branch instructions. So the next topic is going to be data dependence. So in the case of data dependence, we have data dependence comes as a problem when we look into loop level parallelism. So what is loop level parallelism, and how can you remove this loop level parallelism? So this loop level parallelism can be exploited by unrolling the loop statically or dynamically. Once again, in the case of statical unrolling, we have to make use of the compiler based approaches, and in the case of the dynamic one, we have to make use of the hardware based approaches. So we can also use a single instruction multiple data stream vector processors as well as graphical processing units are making use of this loop level parallelism for execution of the instructions. So what are the challenges which are involved in the case of the data dependence problem? The challenges are going to be, the first one we call it as the instruction J is said to be data dependent on instruction I if I is actually producing a result that should be used by the instruction J. Let us consider two different instructions I as well as instruction J in a normal sequence of program, and the instruction I on execution produces a result, and the result of execution of this instruction I is used by instruction J. This is what is called as data dependency existing between two different instructions, instruction I as well as instruction J over here. Now, the instruction J is said to be data dependent on instruction K, and K is said to be data dependent on instruction I. So this is actually going to be a cycle of dependency between different instructions I, J as well as K over there, where we have three sequence of instructions of program instructions. I is one, J is following and K next, where the execution of I is followed by J and J execution is followed by K. If the results of execution of instruction I as well as instruction J are to be used by instruction K, we call it as a cyclic data dependency. So in both the cases, we have to eliminate this data dependence if we want to exploit the instruction level parallelism among the different instructions. So the dependent instructions cannot be executed simultaneously. We all know very well that if the data which is produced by instruction I has to be used as a data for instruction J, instruction I as well as instruction J cannot be executed in parallel, or they cannot be executed simultaneously. So basically, dependencies are going to be a property of a program where we cannot eliminate data dependencies as a whole, because a program is actually going to be a sequence of instructions, and the result of execution of an instruction has to be taken into account when we execute the next instruction. So therefore, what could be done in the case if arises data dependencies? So pipeline organization determines if dependence is detected and if it causes a stall. Suppose if there is a data dependence problem in our program and that data dependence is supposed to cause a stall, what is that which could be done at the pipelining stage in order to remove this data dependency problem? So data dependence conveys, suppose if we have data dependence problem between two different instructions, it conveys the possibility of a hazard. Possibility of a hazard or arising of a hazard at later stages of execution of a program is always possible, and then the order in which the results must be calculated. That is, the result of execution of the instruction I should be available before the execution of the instruction J. So this is going to be the second one, and the upper bound on exploitable instruction level parallelism. Suppose if we decide to exploit instruction level parallelism, in that case, what is the upper bound on the number of instructions which could be evolved in parallel? So that is what is the upper bound or the upper target which the programmer is supposed to meet at. So dependencies that flow through the memory locations are difficult to detect. Suppose every time we have to get the data from a memory location, the memory access itself is actually going to be a problem, because if in case of data dependency. What is name dependence? The two instructions are going to use the same name but no flow of information between them. Two instructions are using the same register name, or two instructions are going to use this name of a memory location, but there is no communication or there is no flow of information between them. This is what we actually call it as name dependence. So in the case of name dependence, it is not a true data dependence problem, but it is actually going to be a problem of reordering the instructions. But when in the case of execution of the instructions, we have two different types of execution. One is in order execution and the other one is called as out of order execution. So what is in order execution in the sense? The program actually consists of a sequence of instructions, and if all the instructions are executed one after the other, we call it as an in order execution. What is out of order execution in the sense? Suppose if we have a branch instruction coming in between, in that case what happens is the flow of execution of instruction or the program is not going to be the normal sequence of flow, but depending on the decision taken on a branch, the jump of program execution is going to be transferred to some other point in the program. So this is what is actually going to happen when we go for the out of order execution. So in case of in order execution and out of order execution, suppose if we come across this name dependence problem, we have to take care of reordering such instructions over here. So what is anti-dependence? So here we come across two different important concepts. One is called as anti-dependence and the other one is called as output dependence. So what is anti-dependence problem? So in the case of anti-dependence problem, instruction J writes into a register or a memory location that instruction I reads. So what happens is there are two different instructions I as well as J over here. So here instruction J is supposed to write a particular data into the memory location or a register over there. That instruction I is supposed to read. In such a case, the write operation must happen first, followed by the read operation. This is what is the normal sequence, and if something goes wrong and the instruction I reads the data before J writes the actual result into it, definitely that is going to result in a hazard over here. So therefore, the initial ordering of I before J must definitely be preserved in order for this anti-dependence problem not to happen. So what is output dependence is, there are two different instructions, instruction I as well as instruction J. Both of them are executed, and if both of them try to write into the same register or a memory location, this is what is going to, there arises a clash between both of them, and this is what is actually output dependence. The ordering of the instructions I as well as J must be preserved once again in order to eliminate this output dependence. So to resolve, use the renaming technique. In order to solve both the anti-dependence problem as well as the output dependence problem, we have to use the renaming techniques. The renaming techniques are coming in the following topics. So what are the other factors which contribute to the problems of data dependence as well as name dependence? So the first problem is actually going to be the data hazard. So what is data hazard? Data hazards are of three different types. One is going to be read after write hazard, the other one is going to be write after write hazard, and the third one is going to be write after read hazard. So in these three cases, take the same example as we have two different instructions, instruction I as well as instruction J. In the case of read after write hazard, instruction I is supposed to read a result only after instruction J writes the result into that particular register or a memory location. If the ordering of this sequence is not preserved, it gives rise to read after write hazard. So what is this write after write hazard? Write after write hazard, if it involves two instructions, instruction I is supposed to write first and then the instruction J, and if this sequence of ordering is not preserved, it gives rise to write after write hazard. The final one is write after read hazard. So first the data should be data or the result which is already present in the register or the memory location should be read by the instruction, and then only the write operation is supposed to happen. And here also, if this does not occur according to the prescribed sequence, it is going to result in a data hazard for the program under execution. So what is control dependence? So control dependence mainly talks about the instructions which are executed as a result of a branch decision. So what is actually a branch decision? A branch decision results when you execute a branch instruction. So the branch instruction is going to have two different outcomes. One is whether it satisfies the S condition or whether it satisfies the no condition. Accordingly, when the branch instruction satisfies the S condition, the execution is going to jump off to a different memory location, and when the execution jumps off, when the execution satisfies the no condition, the execution is going to jump off to a different location. So therefore, in this case, with respect to a branch instruction, and ordering of instruction, particular instruction I should always be preserved. That is, we are not, instruction is control dependent on a branch, cannot be moved before the branch so that its execution is no longer controlled by that branch. That is, we have a particular branch and this instruction which is control dependent on a branch cannot be moved before the branch. Suppose if the result of the instruction, execution of the instruction is control dependent on a branch, it cannot be moved before the branch. And this reverse also applies. Suppose the instruction is not control dependent, it cannot be brought inside a branch loop, so it cannot be moved after the branch so that its execution is completely controlled by that branch. So these two things have to be considered when you go for the problem of control dependence, and this control dependence mainly comes into picture when we have branch decisions or branch instructions in a problem and in a program, and the transfer of execution of the program happens as a result of the branch instruction. So let me present you some examples for this data dependencies. Let me present you some examples for this data dependencies. The first one is, suppose if we are trying to do a double floating point operation of addition of two different register contents R2 as well as R3, and the result is stored in R1. And this particular branch equal to 0, R4 comma L, checks whether the content of L is equal to 0, and the subsequent operation is a subtraction floating point instruction, and this is also going to be a logical OR instruction. In these cases, what actually happens is the OR instruction is dependent on the double add and the double subtract instructions, because the OR instruction makes use of the results available in the register R1 as a whole. So here our OR instruction makes use of this R1 content, and so this OR instruction can be executed only after proper execution of these two instructions, double add as well as double subtract. Therefore, we say that this OR instruction is dependent on double add as well as double subtract operations. There is one more execution. So here we have a branch instruction. So this branch instruction, if it is satisfied, it jumps over here to the skip loop. So these two instructions are going to be branch dependent, because the execution of these instructions cannot be moved anywhere, but it is also possible to move this D sub before the branch over here, because the branch equal to 0 jumps off to the switch skip location over here, where the next instruction to be executed is an OR instruction. So what are the compiler techniques for exposing this instruction level parallelism? So the compiler approaches are mainly going to be statical approaches, and these are going to be what are the compiler approaches which we are going to use for exposing this instruction level parallelism. So here we can separate the dependent instruction from the source instruction by the pipeline latency of the source instruction. So what they try to tell you is, if there are two instructions I as well as J, and the result of the instruction I determines the execution of instruction J. That is, in that case, instruction I becomes the source instruction and instruction J becomes the dependent instruction. So, in the case of this pipeline scheduling, what is the general method which is adopted is, the source instruction as well as the dependent instruction are separated by a latency, by a number of clock cycles, which is equal to the pipeline latency of the source instruction. So this is what you actually call it as pipeline scheduling. So what is this? For understanding this definition, we must first of all know what is pipeline latency. So what is pipeline latency in the sense, if suppose you have an instruction I, and the time for which this instruction is going to wait in the pipeline for execution, that is the time of prefetching this instruction and then the time of decoding this instruction, is what you call it as pipeline latency. So the source instruction and the dependent instruction should be separated by a distance in clock cycles which is equal to the pipeline latency of the source instruction. So this is what is actually going to be called as pipeline scheduling. So for example, we have a table which tells you about some examples of the latency in the clock cycles if you consider source instruction as well as the destination instruction. So let us consider that the instruction producing the result is actually a source instruction, and the instruction using the result is actually a dependent instruction. So here we consider a floating point ALU operation, we take it as a source instruction, and when we take another floating point ALU operation as a dependent instruction, the distance between these two instructions in clock cycles must be equal to 3 clock cycles. The latency is actually going to be 3 clock cycles if the source and the dependent instructions, both of them are floating point ALU operation. In the second example is, if it is going to be a floating point ALU operation taken as a source instruction and the dependent instruction is a store double operation, in that case the distance between both of them is equal to 2 clock cycles. Here, if we consider a double loading instruction and a double data and floating point ALU operation, the latency between both of them is equal to 1 clock cycle. If we consider a load double and a store double, the latency between both of them is going to be equal to 0, or the number of clock cycles is equal to 0 between both of them. So these are just some examples of the latency in clock cycles between the source instruction and the dependent instruction. So what are pipeline stalls and how can they be eliminated? So here, this is actually a load instruction, and for a load instruction the latency is actually going to be, for a load double and followed by a floating point ALU operation, the latency is equal to 1 clock cycle. So this 1 clock cycle is what is brought over here. This is one load instruction and this is one floating point ALU operation. So the latency in clock cycle is actually going to be equal to 1 clock cycle. So for example, consider these two operations. This is one floating point ALU operation and this is one store double operation. So in between this floating point ALU operation and the store double operation, the number of clock cycle latency is equal to 2. So that is what we have over here. So this is what is proceeding as a common problem, a common program. And how can you eliminate this pipeline stalls? So therefore, we are employing the method of pipeline scheduling in order to remove these stalls over here. So now what is that which happens here is, we are now just rearranging the program such that we get only 2 clock cycle latency inside the program. So how do we actually rearrange it? When we consider this program adds a scalar quantity F2 to the content of the memory locations R1 till R8. R1 is one register which points out to one memory location. So the content of this memory location is loaded to the register F0 over here. So now to this F0 we add a particular scalar quantity F2 in one F2 register, and this result of this addition F0 plus F2 is stored in the register F4 over here. So this results in 2 different stalls. Now what happens here is, the result of F4 is stored in R1 over here. Now we want to point out to the next memory location which contains the next data. So therefore what is it we are doing is, we are incrementing this value of R1 by a numerical value equal to 8, so that we can prefetch the next data. So that is what is done over here. And so here one more integer load latency is taken to be equal to 1. So this is the actual sequence of program, and now what happens is, we are actually eliminating or reducing the number of stalls in the original program into 2 with the help of pipeline scheduling and by the help of rearranging the program. So how do you rearrange the different instructions in the program? Here we have load F00 of R1 as usual, and then here itself we make R1 to point out to the next data, because the register R1 is not going to be used afterwards. afterwards after execution. So immediately R1 is made to point out to the next data, next memory location where the next data is to be fetched up. So here add the F4, F0, F2, the same operation is going to happen. We are just having a scalar quantity in the register F2, and this F2 plus F0 is being added and put up in register F4. So definitely this double floating point operation is going to cause two different stalls over here, two different clock cycle latency, and then we have the store operation where we store the result of the next memory content into F4 itself, and then the loop continues over here. So this is actually going to be a branch if not equal to 0 loop, and so this continues till all the contents are getting added up with the scalar quantity. So this is what is actually pipeline scheduling, where we make use of the latency in the clock cycles in between the operations and rearrange the program sequence in such a way that there is minimum clock cycle latency between two different instructions. So one more technique for this compiler exploitation is going to be this loop unrolling. So in the case of loop unrolling, what is that we are going to do is, we are going to, suppose if we have a loop inside a program, we are going to unroll the loop by assuming that by a factor of 4. Why do you do it by a factor of 4 is, it is always known to everyone that all the quantity whatever we use in the program are going to be divisible by a factor of 4. That is when we use either 8 bits or 16 bits or 32 bits or 64 bits or 128 bits. All these bits are actually going to be divisible by a factor of 4, and therefore in the case of loop unrolling, we are doing this unrolling of the loop by a factor of 4, assuming that all the element values are divisible by 4. So here we are supposed to eliminate the unnecessary instructions in the program. So here load F0 with 0 of R1 and F2 with F0. Store this R1 into F4. We are actually going to drop this double add as well as branch not equal to, because branch not equal to is the instruction which brings the loop into this particular program. So we are just removing off double add as well as BNE, and so if suppose we are dropping this loop and we are making use of this loop unrolling, what is the negative point in this case? The negative point is the number of live registers versus the original loop. Here, because when we have dropped this branch not equal to instruction, the number of live registers which we are going to use in the program is actually going to increase, because the loop is removed over here, and every time we are using F4, F6, F8, F10, F12, F60, F14, F16, all these are going to be additional registers when we unroll this loop. This is what is the negative point. The negative point is the number of live registers used in the case of loop unrolling becomes greater when compared to where we use the pipeline scheduling. In the actual method, we make use of only 4 registers till F4, F0, F2, F4, and here in this case we are making use of F0, F2, F4, F6, F8, F10, F12, F14, F16, and all these are going to be more number of live registers when compared to the original loop. So how will you employ both loop unrolling as well as pipeline scheduling in order to bring this instruction level parallelism? So in that case, what is that we are doing is, we are loading one register with the content of R1, loading another register F6 with the content of a memory location which is at a distance of A from the content pointed out by R1. That is what is actually this meaning. And again, F10 is being loaded with the content of a memory location which is at a distance of 16 from the content which is pointed out by R1. And again, F14 is actually going to be loaded with data which is at a distance of 24 from the memory location pointed out by R1. So we are loading all these things, and to all these values we are adding a scalar quantity F2, and finally we are storing all the results over here. And this is also once again put up on a loop so that it continues. So in this case, what is that we are doing is, we are taking care of the latency between the clock cycles, because we have latency between the following instructions, because there are 4 load operations following, there are 4 add operations following, and number of SD store operations also following over there. So this reduces the number of clock cycles. At the same time, this reduces the stalling between the instructions, and at the same time it also takes care of the loop unrolling. This also employs loop unrolling, because we have unrolled the loop to some extent. We are not totally unrolling the loop because removing the loop, because if we totally unroll the loop, what will happen is, it is going to result in more number of line registers. So we are not going to totally unroll the loop, but we are going to do it partially, and we are also going to make use of pipeline scheduling so that the consecutive instructions result in a minimum latency clock cycles. So there is also one more technique which is going to be called as strip mining. So what does strip mining actually tell you is, strip mining tells you about the number of iterations and number of loops. What is the maximum number of loop iterations you can have? I told you that we are doing loop unrolling partially. So what is the formula, or what is the procedure to find out the number of loops inside a program? This is what is determined by a procedure called as strip mining. In strip mining, what is that we are doing is, what is the number of loop iterations is unknown to us. So therefore we can take the number of iterations as n. So we have to make k copies of the loop body. The loop body is executed the branch register number of times, which means k copies of the loop has to be run over again and again. So therefore you have to generate the pairs of loop and execute it n mod k times first, and the second loop is executed n by k times. We are actually forming a pair of loop. The pair of loop, we have loop 1 as well as loop 2. The first loop is executed n mod k times, and the second loop is being executed n by k times. So this technique is what you call it as strip mining over here. Next type of technique which is used to exploit this instruction level parallelism among different instructions is actually going to be branch prediction. So what is branch prediction, and how can we make use of this branch prediction? In this branch prediction technique, if we have a particular branch, the outcome of this branch, execution of this branch instruction is first of all predicted to be either the S condition or the no condition, and the program flow proceeds accordingly. If what we have predicted is correct, it goes as such. If the prediction is wrong, we have to come back to the original point and take the alternate route what is available. So this is what is branch prediction. And so what are the different types of branch predictions available? The first one is a basic 2-bit predictor. So here we are, for each branch, we are predicting whether the branch is taken or it is not taken. So predict taken or non-taken, and suppose if we are predicting wrongly for 2 consecutive times, we have to change the prediction. So this is what is a basic 2-bit predictor problem, and for each branch you predict whether the loop can be taken or it cannot be taken. If 2 times we predict wrongly, we have to consider the next option available. Now, what are correlating predictors? In the case of correlating predictors, we have multiple number of 2-bit predictors per branch, and multiple number of 2-bit predictors are available for each branch. So out of each possible combination of outcomes of preceding n branches. In the case of correlating predictor, we have to take care of the preceding n branches here, and depending on the outcomes of preceding n branches and the available combinations with the help of these 2-bit predictors, you can take out a branch of execution. In the case of this local predictor, what happens is, here also we are going to have 2-bit predictors for each branch, but we have to consider the last n occurrences of the branch. That is what is the difference between this correlating predictor and the local predictor. In the case of correlating predictor, we have to consider the preceding n occurrences. In the case of this local predictor, we have to consider the last n occurrences of this branch. Both of them are going to use only two different predictor bits. So, a tournament predictor is a combination of both this correlating predictor as well as a local predictor, which is going to make use of the preceding conditions as well as the last occurrences of the instructions. So, if we try to analyze the performance of this branch prediction, what actually happens is, when we take the conditional branch misprediction rate, we try to plot a graph between the total predictor size as well as the prediction branch misprediction rate. We find that the local 2-bit predictors are going up, having a performance of about 8 to 7% decrease over here, and then followed by the correlating predictors, and the minimum is for the misprediction rate is minimum for the tournament predictor. Therefore, it is a well-known fact from the graph that we can make use of a combination of this particular local 2-bit predictors as well as correlating predictor into a tournament predictor in order to find out this prediction values. So, dynamic scheduling is one more option for going for this instruction level parallelism. So, this dynamic scheduling, as I have already told you, makes use of the hardware techniques. It doesn't make use of the compiler technique, it makes use of the hardware techniques, whatever is available. Now, what is it we are going to do is, we are going to rearrange the order of instructions in order to reduce the stalls while maintaining the data flow. How will you rearrange the order of execution of the instructions? So, what are the advantages? The advantage is the compiler doesn't have to have knowledge of the microarchitecture of the program. It handles the cases where the dependencies are unknown at the compiling time. At the time of compilation, if you have dependencies, the dependencies are going to be handled at the time of compiler prediction itself. So, what are the disadvantages? Definitely, as I have told you, it is taken care of hardware. So, there is going to be an increase in the hardware complexity, and it also complicates the exceptions. So, what are exceptions and how are they handled? The exceptions are normally going to be some interrupts or different subroutines which are going to be executed when an exceptional condition arises in the program. So, these exceptions have to be taken care of carefully, and therefore, this static dynamic scheduling is automatically going to complicate this exception handling process also. So, when we take care of this dynamic scheduling, we have to look into two important points. One is in-order execution and another one is out-of-order execution. So, this dynamic scheduling implies out-of-order execution as well as out-of-order completion over here. So, what is out-of-order execution? Order of execution is going to be the order in which the instructions appear in the program. But out-of-order execution means that we are executing some instructions which are not in the same actual sequence of the program, but it is out of order when compared to the presence of the instructions in the program. So, they have to be executed out of order and completed also out of order in when we go for the dynamic scheduling process. So, this creates the possibility of write after read and write after write hazards, because we are doing everything out of order. So, it is going to create write after write and write after write read hazards here. So, we make use of a different approach called as Tomasulo's approach in order to solve this problem of this out of order execution. So, what does Tomasulo's approach tell you is, it tracks when the operands are available. Our main problem in out of order execution hazard, that is write after read and write after write hazard, is when the operands are available for execution for the next instruction. So, this is what is our actual problem or the main problem. So, therefore, if we are able to track when the operands are available for execution, it would be well and good and better. So, therefore, Tomasulo's approach proposes a solution for this problem, and it introduces register renaming in hardware. As I have already told you, dynamic scheduling is implemented with the help of hardware only. So, therefore, this register renaming, what we did in the case of this pipeline scheduling, that particular technique is going to be used here with the help of, done here with the help of hardware. So here it minimizes, what is the advantage of this? It minimizes the write after write and the write after read hazards. So how do you do this register, how do you use this register renaming technique and try to find out when the operands are available for execution by the next instruction is what is actually this Tomasulo's approach. So what is this register renaming technique? So if you look into our ordinary program what we had written earlier. So this has a double divide operation where we are dividing F2 by F4 and writing the result in F0. Here we are once again having a double add operation where we are adding the content of F0 with F8 and result is put in F6 over here. And the same F6 value, F8 value is also used over here, and this is what is actually going to be anti-dependence over here. That is, we have an instruction I and instruction J, and instruction J needs the result of this particular instruction I. And once again we also have anti-dependence existing between the store operation and the multiply operation, where the register F6 is used in both the cases. So in these cases what you actually find here is we have a name dependence with F6, because F6 is going to be the same place where the output of this instruction is also going to be written over here, and F6 is also going to be the same place where the output of this multiply instruction is also going to be written over here. So therefore we also have anti-dependence followed by the name dependence. Anti-dependence is because the results are going to be available, the results of F8 are to be used over here once again, and name dependence is because F6 is used in both the cases. So therefore, here once again here also we are actually going to have a read after write hazard, and how can we solve this particular read after write hazard also? By the technique of dynamic scheduling. So now we have a solution for this the dynamic scheduling problem is actually going to be the register renaming technique. And in the case of this Tomasulo's approach which is proposed for this register renaming, we are going to make use of hardware units called as reservation stations. So what these particular reservation stations are going to do here is, register renaming is provided by the reservation stations. They actually contain the instructions and the buffered operand values whenever they are available. Our main problem is to take or to find out when the operand values are available over here. So therefore this register renaming technique makes use of this reservation stations. They are going to contain the instructions which are to be executed, and they are also going to track the operands over here. And the next one is the reservation stations number the instructions, provide the operand values. We use a particular tag for numbering of each and every instructions which are going to give you the actual operand values. So the tag value is what is the special identity which is added when we go for this reservation stations. So the reservation station fetches and buffers an operand as soon as it becomes available. So when the operand becomes available, instead of transferring it to a total register file, the reservation station will supply the address from which the operands are to be loaded, and we also have the store buffer into which the data are to be stored over here. Now, the floating point the instruction queue contains the instructions to be executed. So, this floating point operations are received through the operation bus, and the operands are received through the operand bus. Here we have two different buses. One is receiving the operations from the instruction queue, and the other one is receiving the operands from the registers. So, as soon as the execution takes place, in the floating point adder as well as in the floating point multiplier. So, as soon as the execution takes place, what happens is the result of execution of these units is being written into a common database, or we have to actually use the word called as broadcasting. So, the results are actually broadcast into the common database. where the results are going to be taken over there and written into the floating point registers. So here, in between, we find the reservation stations. The reservation stations are actually going to contain the operands, because we are not taking the operands directly from the registers. We are going to take the operands only from the buffers in the reservation stations. Thereby, we can eliminate the problem of scheduling over here. So here and once again, from the common data bus, it is also possible for you to write the data into the memory, where the results of this execution are going to be written into the store buffers first, and from the store buffers, the address and the data is the actual result, and the address is actually going to be the memory location where we are going to write the result into. So this is what is a basic block diagram of the top level design which is proposed by Tomasulo's algorithm. So what does this load and store buffers contain? The load and store buffers contain the data as well as the addresses over there. The data is actually the results of the operation, and the address is going to be the address of the memory location from where we are supposed to fetch the data during the load operation, or the address is going to be the memory location where we are supposed to write the data into the memory location. So this is what is actually a basic Tomasulo's approach proposed over there. It is also possible for us to enhance this Tomasulo's approach further. So here, so what are the problems in the case of this Tomasulo's approach? The problem is how to fetch the instructions from the FIFO. The first one is how to get the next instruction from the FIFO, and if the reservation station is available, issue the instruction to the reservation station with operand values if available. Whatever we have already seen in the block diagram is once again explained in the slide. So once again, the operands are once the operands are available here, these operands are issued to the reservation stations, and the instruction is taken from the instruction queue, and the execution takes place in the floating point adder and the floating point multiplier. Results are broadcast into the common data bus. So that is what is being written over here. Write the result on the common data bus, from where we are actually transferring it to the reservation stations as well as the store buffers. So this is just an example. This is just the status of the instructions which is being executed in this Tomasulo's algorithm. So what are the three different states? One is going to be the issue state for an instruction, the other one is the execute state for the instruction, and the third one is going to be the write of the result operation. So here the load operation writes a register content into file F6. So this particular instruction is going to have three stages: issue, execute as well as writing the result, and it also proceeds as such. So each reservation station is actually going to contain a different register which is going to contain a number of bits, which is going to be a busy bit, type of operation bit. Vj and Vk are going to be the values of the source operand, and Qj and Qk are going to tell you about the operation what is to be done, and A is actually the address of the memory location where the result are to be written into it. So each reservation station contains one particular register which contains all these bits. So one is the busy bit. So busy bit tells you whether the reservation station is busy or not, and then operation tells you about the type of operation what is to be carried out. The type of operation, in the sense it is a load operation, it is a subtraction operation, it may be a multiplication operation, and it may be a division operation also. And Vj and Vk are the values of the source operands. So the value will be in a memory location which is pointed out by 32 plus register 32, the content of a memory location, and Qj and Qk are once again going to be the instructions or the type of operations what are to be carried out. And so what is the register status? We are using the registers starting from F0, F2, F4, F6, F8, F10, F12 and so on. So for all these registers, what is the register status? We are using F0, F2, F4 is free, F6, F8 and F10. So what is the content of the field at Qi and what are the operations involved in by all the registers? That is also what is specified in the last column. So after completing all these dynamic scheduling technique, we are now moving on to a new technique which is called as speculation. So what is actually meant by speculation? The word speculation means that we are executing an instruction on a trial basis. If the trial succeeds, we are going to do the process of updating of the final register value. And if the trial is not going to succeed, we are going to go for the execution in the next stage. This is what is actually going to be speculation. So if we are doing it with the help of the hardware units in the processor, it is going to be a hardware based speculation process. So in this hardware based speculation process, we are executing the instructions along the predicted execution path, but we are going to commit the values or the answer values to the registers only when the prediction is correct. This is what is actually going to be speculation. What is speculation in the sense? We are executing the instructions on a trial basis, on a prediction basis. If the trial succeeds or the answer what we get is correct, we are supposed to update the file. So updating of the register file is what is a process called as committing. So we are committing, but the results only if the prediction was correct. So what is instruction commit? We have a process called as instruction commit. In the instruction commit process, an instruction is allowed to update a register only when the result is correct. That is what is given over here. Allowing an instruction to update the register file when the instruction is no longer speculative. The instruction is no longer speculative means that we have got the actual result which is received as a result of execution of the instruction, and if the result which is received is correct, we actually go for the updation of the register file, or we allow the instruction to update the register file. This is what is going to be an instruction committing process. And then now what is the additional hardware which is necessary when we go for this hardware based speculation? In this case, we require an additional hardware unit in order to put all the things into the proper place if something goes wrong. Something goes wrong in the sense we have taken up a speculation operation and the result produces a very wrong result. In that case, we have to do something in order to go back to the original situation, or we have to do something in order to correct the execution to the original answer. So therefore, in that case, we need an additional piece of hardware to prevent any irrevocable action until an instruction commits. Until an instruction does the operation of commitment, something irrevocable must not happen inside the processor. Therefore, we need an additional hardware for that. So it is like, that is just like updating the state or execution, taking an execution path. So updating the state or taking an execution path is always an irrevocable action, because that cannot be revoked once again, or things cannot be changed once again. So we must have an additional hardware unit inside the processor if we go for this operation of speculation, because we have to avoid this irrevocable operation. So that hardware unit what I was talking to you about is called as the reorder buffer. So what this reorder buffer is going to do is, this reorder buffer is going to hold the result of the instruction in between the completion of execution of the instruction as well as the commitment of the instruction. I think the execution of the completion of the instruction or the execution of the instruction gives a result, and in the time instance between the completion of the instruction and the commitment of the instruction, where to hold this particular result value. That is what is done in the reorder buffer. So this reorder buffer is also an additional hardware, it's an additional hardware which is going to help you in the hardware based speculation process. So what are the 4 different fields in this reorder buffer? Just as we have 7 fields in the reservation stations, we have 4 fields in the reorder buffer. One is going to be the instruction type, the second one is going to be the destination field, the third one is going to be the value field, and the fourth one is going to be the ready field. So here in the instruction type, we have to tell whether it is a branch instruction, a store operation, or it is going to be a register instruction. In the case of the destination field, it is just going to be a register number. Either it is F0, F2, F6, F4 or whatever it is. It is just specifies the name of the register which you are supposed to update or which you are supposed to commit as a result of execution of the instruction. And then what is the output value? And ready field is whether the execution operation is complete or not. That is what is specified by the ready field. So the reorder buffer will have all these 4 fields, and the main point is going to be the committing of the instruction is what is more important, where we get the actual valid result into the register file. We modify the reservation stations. The operand source is now reorder buffer instead of the functional unit. So previously what is that we were doing? The operands, the place from where we were fetching the operand was only the reservation stations, but in this case the place where we fetch the operand from is going to be a reorder buffer. That is what is the difference over here. Now, in the case of this reorder buffer, here the register values and the memory values are not written until an instruction commits. Until we have the process of commitment of the instruction, the register values and the memory values are not updated. We have some time in between the time of execution of the instruction as well as the time of commitment over here. And on misprediction, what happens is the entries which you think to be speculated in the reorder buffer are to be cleared. Until an instruction commits, if suppose you have any misprediction coming into picture, those entries in the reorder buffer can very well be cleared over here. And what are the exceptions? Exceptions are not recognized until it is ready to commit. Until the instruction commit operation happens, you are not ready to take care of the exceptions, because the exceptions become irrevocable actions which cannot be corrected as such. So here, what are multiple issue as processors and static scheduling? So in the case of static scheduling, it is going to involve the compiler or it is going to involve the software over here. So in the case of multiple issue process, what is it we are going to do is, we are going to issue multiple number of instructions. So that is what is going to be per one particular clock cycle. In order to achieve the cycles per instruction to be less than 1, we need to complete multiple number of instructions per clock. In one clock cycle, what is the multiple number of instructions which could be executed? That is what is the process of multiple issue. And so here it involves the software, because we talk about only the instructions which are going to be executed in one clock cycle. So this comes under the static scheduling. And here, what are the solutions to this particular multiple issue process? The solutions are, either we can go for a superscalar processor, statically scheduled superscalar processor, or we can have a dynamically scheduled superscalar processor, or we can also have a very long instruction word processors over here, or BLIW processor over here. So in the case of the statically scheduled superscalar processor, the scheduling is going to be done by software, which is going to be called as statical scheduling. And in the case of dynamically scheduled superscalar processor, the scheduling is going to be done by means of the hardware. So what are the different issues which are going to be related over here? Here we have the common name for the processors. One is superscalar, superscalar static, superscalar dynamic, superscalar speculative, very long instruction word, and EPIC, extended programmable instruction computer. So in all these cases, what are the distinguishing characteristics? Whether we have in-order execution and when do we have out-of-order execution. In this case of superscalar processor, we don't have speculation at all, but we have speculation in the case of this superscalar processor. And what are the example processors which make use of this superscalar techniques? That is what is specified in the last column over here, and how we are actually going to take care of these hazards, whether it is done by the compiler or the hardware over here. Because it is actually going to be static scheduling, these This is only handled by the compiler over here. So what are very long instruction word processors? We have seen what are superscalar processors, static as well as dynamic. And so the next topic is going to be very long instruction word processors. As I have already told you, we are going to issue multiple number of instructions in one clock cycle. So therefore, what is that we are doing is, the number of instructions which can be issued are going to be packed off into a very long instruction word, and we are going to issue that particular instruction. This is what is actually going to be a very long instruction word processor, because we want to increase the number of instructions over there. Therefore, we are packing off a set of instructions into a very long instruction word, and we are giving it for execution. So, packaging multiple operations into one instruction is what you call it as very long instruction word processor. So, what is the example VLIW processors? What are the examples of VLIW processors available? We can have one integer instruction, two independent floating point operations. We can have two independent memory references. Two independent floating point operations can be packed off together in order to produce a single word, and that becomes a very long instruction which could be executed by this VLIW processor. But what happens is, must be enough parallelism in the code in order to fill the available slots. But if you want to go for this VLIW processor, there must be enough parallelism available in the code or the sequence of the program over here. So what are the disadvantages here? The disadvantages in this case are, we are statically finding the parallelism, the code size become lengthier, there is no hardware for reduction of the hazards, and the last point is, there is no compatibility with the binary code. That is, we are packaging a number of instructions into one very long instruction. So the compatibility between the binary bits have to be taken care of when you package the instructions. So these are going to be the disadvantages when you go for the VLIW processors over here. So now, comparing this dynamic scheduling and then multiple issue and speculation processes together. How do we compile the dynamic scheduling process, and the multiple issue process, as well as the speculation, and combined dynamic scheduling plus multiple issue plus speculation? How can you do it in order to achieve a modern microarchitecture for a processor? So in this case, there are two approaches. What are the two approaches in this sense? The first approach is, we have to assign the reservation stations and update the pipeline control table in half clock cycles. So a word contains about 32 bits. So in the case of this 32 bits, it is going to support only 2 instructions per clock. So a very long instruction word is what we are bringing inside when we go for a multiple issue processor. So therefore, we can execute only 2 instructions per 1 clock cycle. And we can also design the logic to handle any possible dependencies between the instructions. That is, here, like your reorder buffer is actually going to handle the dependencies between the dependencies called as the anti-dependence as well as the named dependence. We can also make use of this a new logic which is designed in order to eliminate the possible dependencies. And we can have hybrid approaches which combine both the 2 cases also. So here the main problem is how to issue the instructions to the execution unit. The issue logic becomes a bottleneck when we have more number of instructions to be issued in 1 clock cycle, because the instructions have to be issued by the instruction queue. So when we try to issue more number of instructions in 1 clock cycle, the issue of the instructions also becomes a great problem over here. So this is actually going to be a block diagram which takes care of dynamic scheduling, multiple issue as well as speculation process. The Tomasulo's approach, what we have seen in the earlier slides, here this algorithm, what we have seen earlier, has been modified here by considering all these things what we have learned so far. Dynamic scheduling, multiple issue as well as speculation. By considering all these three processes, if you modify the Tomasulo's approach, how you are going to get the block diagram. So this is what is the overview of the design of the processor, which is following the Tomasulo's approach and also incorporating the dynamic scheduling, the speculation and also the multiple issue. So suppose if you see here, we find the reorder buffer sitting on the top, which is going to be a hardware unit which is going to help you in the dynamic scheduling process. As I have already told you, the reorder buffer is responsible for the revocation. And then we have the integer and the floating point registers which are going to contain the data, the operand buses which are going to give the operands to the reservation stations, and we also have the instruction queue which fetches the instruction from the instruction unit and gives it through the operation bus to all the reservation stations. See, the operations are given from the instruction queue to the reservation stations, and the operands are taken from the integer and floating point registers through the operand buses and given to all the reservation stations. At the bottom, we actually find the functional units. What are the functional units? The functional units are which take care of the actual operation or the arithmetic operation what are to be performed. We have the floating point adder, we have the floating point multiplier, and we also have the floating and the integer unit available over here. So the results of execution of these floating point adders, multipliers and the integer unit are actually going to be broadcast into the common data bus. When the results are available in the common data bus, they are taken over to the reorder buffer. At the same time, we have to also note one difference between the proposed Tomasulo's approach over here. In the last approach, we had the store buffers, where now we are actually eliminating the store buffer. The store buffer is not found here in this diagram, and what we find here is only the load buffer, and the load buffer takes the addresses from the address unit and takes care of loading the addresses, and the store address is directly taken off from here from the reorder buffer, and the data are being loaded into the memory unit what is available. So the changes in this case when compared to the previous Tomasulo's approach processor is, one is we have included the reorder buffer. The second one is we have modified the integer register is also coming into picture because we are going for VLIW operations. So we have the integer and the floating point register and the integer unit to take care of the integer operations. And the third one is we don't have the store units coming into picture, store buffers coming into picture which are going to be used for the store operation. So this is what is actually a modified Tomasulo's approach which takes care of the dynamic scheduling, multiple issue as well as the speculation processes which we have discussed so far. So as we have seen, the dynamic scheduling is taken care by the reservation stations. The multiple issue is taken care by having both the floating point as well as the integer units coming into picture, and the speculation operation is taken care by the help of the reorder buffer. This is how we have modified the Tomasulo's approach by taking care of all these three concepts. So here, in the case of multiple issue, we can do only one thing. We can merge a set of instructions into a single bundle. We can include a set of instructions and combine or package a group of instructions into a single bundle over here. So, for example, we can have one floating point operation, one integer operation, one load operation as well as one store operation, everything packed off together inside a single bundle. And we must also take care of the dependencies among the instructions. When we are packing off all the instructions into a single bundle, the main problem is there should not be any anti-dependence or output dependence between these operations, between these instructions in the same bundle, because the result of execution of one instruction is going to affect the execution of the next instruction. So while packaging the instructions into one bundle, when you give it for multiple issuing, we have to definitely take care of the dependencies between the instructions also. If dependencies exist in the bundle, we have to encode them with the help of the reservation stations. We have to separate them in the reservation bundle, reservation stations, because from the reservation stations we are sending the floating point and the individual operations separately. Also need multiple completion and commit. Previously, when we were executing one instruction, we had only one instruction committing process. Whereas now when we go for multiple issue, we are going to package multiple number of instructions. So definitely what happens is we are going to have a multiple number of commit operations, or multiple commit is going to be present over here. So this is a very good example of the multiple issue instruction, where multiple issue programming, where we have a load operation, a double add a floating point operation, a store operation, a double add or a floating point operation, and once again a branch not equal to 0 example, loop or a branch decision present. So this branch instruction is going to take care of the speculation. We are going to have dynamic scheduling, and we are also going to have the two floating point operations bundled together in order to have a multiple issue. So here we do not have any speculation at all. So here the instructions are being taken over here, and for all these instructions, what are the issues at the clock cycle number, at what clock cycle the instructions are executed, and when do you actually access the memory, or in which clock cycle you actually access the memory when you have the load operation, and where do you write the data into the, when do you write the data into the common data bus. So all these things are explained with respect to the clock cycles, and here we are just skipping off this slide because it tells you about the clock cycle numbers only. And the next topic is going to be branch target buffer. So what does this branch target buffer tell you? When this branch target buffer, when does it come into picture over here? So this branch target buffer comes into picture only when we have the branch prediction process for the speculation coming into picture over here. So in the case of this branch target buffer, when we have the number of instructions to be increased over here, when the number of instructions is increased, what is the negative point here is the bandwidth is going to be increased over here, or we are going to have a high instruction bandwidth over here. We need a very high instruction bandwidth. So therefore, we are actually going to employ the branch target buffers, which are going to tell you about the content of the program counter, or which are actually going to tell you about the content next instruction which is to be executed by the program counter. So the next instruction to be executed by the program counter is actually got as a result of the prediction buffer. So here the next PC prediction buffer, and it is indexed by the current PC. What is available in the user's hand or the programmer's hand, what data is actually available is the present content of the program counter is only available with the user or the programmer. So how to predict the next instruction which the program counter is supposed to execute? This is what is actually taken care by the branch target buffer. So here we have a lookup table which is going to be available over here. So in this lookup table, what happens is, it is actually going to contain the predicted PC. The present PC content is here in the leftmost column, and the predicted PC is present in the next column. So if you are executing one instruction, what happens is, what is the predicted PC and where the instruction execution is going to jump off next in order to find the next instruction which is to be executed. This is what is the content of this particular lookup table. Now when you look into the actual flow chart, it sends the PC to the memory and the branch target buffer. Suppose if you execute an instruction, the present content of the program counter must be immediately sent to the memory, and we must have a copy of the program counter content in the memory, because we have to fetch the program counter content once again after completion of the prediction process. So first of all, let us store the program counter into the memory and the branch target buffer value also into the memory over here, PC over here. So whether the entry is found in the branch target buffer. So we have a PC entry here, we have put up a copy in the memory. So we take this PC content and check with the entries available in the branch target buffer. If one is available, what happens is, if it is S, we take the predicted PC from here. So this predicted PC is taken and we try to take it over here and check whether it has taken a branch or not. If it is a branch instruction and the result is correct, it is assumed that the branch is correctly predicted and the program execution continues over there without any stalls. Suppose if it is mispredicted branch, in that case it results in a no condition. So what is it we have to do is, we have to fetch the program counter once again from the memory and continue the same operation once again. On the other side, if the entry is not present in the branch target buffer, it means that the instruction is not a branch instruction, and therefore if it is not a branch instruction, what happens is, the instruction is not a branch operation, it is a normal instruction. So it continues with the normal instruction execution. If it is a branch instruction, what happens? We have to take the branch prediction at instruction address and find out the PC and continue with the actual execution in the target buffer. So this is what is the flow chart, and only one thing what is to be remembered here is the current PC content, from the current PC content which is received by the branch target buffer, we are supposed to find out the predicted PC value. This is what is the only point which we have to keep it in memory over here. Now, the number of instructions is no instruction is not predicted to be branch means proceed normally over here, and the process continues continuously if it is going to be a branch instruction. If it is a normal instruction, the instruction proceeds as such as per the normal execution, and no decision is necessity if it is not a branch instruction. And then branch folding. So what is branch folding is? If we are going on predicting the results of the branch target buffer, in that case, add a target instruction into the buffer to deal with longer decoding time required by the large buffer. Suppose if the buffer is actually going to be very large, it is also possible for you to reduce the number of branches by using a technique called as the branch folding technique here. With this, we come to an end of different hardware as well as software techniques which are going to be used for exploiting the instruction level parallelism among the instructions, and in the next class I will continue with the multiple issue processors as such. Thank you.